All right, and okay, whenever you're ready. All right. Is that right? Yeah.
I don't understand why. I've had this problem lately where I've like edited something on the F drive, saved it like 3 or 4 times, and then when I open it, it's not changed.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, if you want to keep that.
We'll see.
Okay, well, we're getting the technical stuff set up. I just want to let you guys know. Actually, Craig, what's going on this weekend? You could do our,
Yeah, if you want to go over to the museum, the Deutsche Museum of Arts, they're having, I guess, the series. Today they're having displayed a theater, but been displayed on display in the pavilion. So they have one today, and they also have one tomorrow. I think it's from 7 to 9 p.m. And I think that should count as an honors arts or something. Right? Yeah. Okay. And there are a bunch of stuff going on this weekend. Again, the Sykes Lake Walk. I know I mentioned that last week with the nursing organization. If you want to go walk around Sykes Lake, I think that's on Sunday or tomorrow. Then you can go ahead and do that. And I'll again encourage you guys to download the Quirk app if you have not done so. It will show you basically all of MSU's events and events that you can get credit for as an honor student. So.
any questions while we're getting things set? You're good?
Is there a way to make this little thing go away?
I don't know. Actually, I'll check this one. So,
Alright. Well,
Click on the more. You can click on the more show. It says hide the floating video controls or hide video panels.
there we go.
Then it's the other. Then it's the video. Click escape. And then click on hide video, the floating video panel.
There we go. Thank you.
do I need to unpause screen share?
Resume share, yeah.
Okay, everybody. So we're pleased to have Dr. Jeremy Duff here to talk to us as one of our additional speakers today. I'll let him give his background and information. I'm recording the lecture, so it'll be up on D2L as will be the PowerPoint slides, so you can take a look at these at another time. Okay. Are you good?
Yep. All right. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Sweet. I am Dr. Jeremy Duff. I teach political science, same department as Dr. Garrison. And I have been at Midwestern since 2008 and have taught many of my own honors classes. I've been on the honors program committee, on the honors program admissions committee at one point, and have really enjoyed being involved with the honors program at MSU. And then Dr. Garrison became the director, and so we've had a connection with our department pretty much the whole time that I've been here. So that's been awesome. They asked me to come speak today about surveys. So my area of expertise, if you want to call it, is survey research. I teach the American politics classes here at MSU, and right now I'm teaching a class on campaigns and elections, which is super fun. We had a long discussion yesterday morning about debates. So I could do that if you want, but I think they want me to talk about survey research. So I'll try to focus on that. And I teach courses like the presidency, Congress, and public opinion, which is kind of my sweet spot, if you will, and political parties and interest groups, public administration. I teach a class on personnel management for people who are interested in managing in a government setting. And this semester I'm teaching a class on municipal government, which is the first local government class that I'm aware of we've taught here at MSU in a long time. So that's pretty fun. So anyway, like I said, they asked me to come teach about surveys and survey research. I guess you have some kind of project that you're working on this semester, and you're looking at different research methods and data collection and that kind of stuff. And so I'm going to spend some time talking about what what surveys are, and then some of the problems with surveys, and then the different types of ways to administer surveys or collect data with surveys. Have any of you ever participated in a survey? Whether like a big public opinion survey or, you know, like a Survey Monkey thing or something like that? Okay, yeah. So these are, I mean, incredibly prevalent. I mean, in campaigns and elections, we talk about the polls all the time, and every time they're talking about polls, they're talking about survey results conducted by some organization, right? A lot of the media companies do these, like Fox News, CBS, New York Times, Washington Post, and they try to gauge people's attitudes on the election, on the candidates, and things like that. There's also surveys for other stuff, not just politics. You know, big corporations, they do surveys on their products to see, you know, what people like about their products, what they don't like about their products. I did one time for the government of Michigan that was trying to gauge people's perceptions on, well, actually they were trying to gauge my eating habits. And so it was the health department of the state of Michigan. It was like a 30-minute over-the-phone survey they did with me to see like what I ate and if I was a healthy person and that kind of stuff. So they were using it to form public policy on health matters in the state of Michigan. But and then there's these surveys that we get in the mail. I get some every now and then that aren't really surveys. They are in some ways called push polls, in other ways they're called, we have a term for it called frugging, which is fundraising under the guise of surveys. And so you get some of those, like I've gotten some from like, I have one from the NRA, the National Rifle Association, and others, where they ask you all these scary questions like, if, you know, do you think that the government should take away our guns and allow terrorists to murder us in our sleep or something like that? And then, you know, and then at the end they ask you to send them money for their political cause or whatever. And so there's those types of surveys too. Those are typically referred to as pseudo polls, or like I said, frugging or push polls. They're not really there to gauge actual public opinion. They're there to actually influence public opinion, to push your attitudes in one direction or the other. But when we're talking about legitimate surveys, ones that are conducted by organizations that actually use real science to conduct their surveys and try to get good samples and all that kind of stuff, then there still are some issues that we run into with surveys. And I want to start with probably the biggest one that all survey organizations face when they send out, whether it's mail out questionnaires or they call you and ask you to do a survey over the phone, or even on the internet. Today, there's lots of organizations using internet surveys where you log in or you go to a website and you fill out a survey online. We use those here at MSU quite a bit to do all sorts of different things, and you've probably seen them. I mean, even your student evaluations, in a sense, are a survey, right? So the biggest issue, and you may even think about this in the sense of your student evaluations, if you've done those before, is non-attitudes. So the problem is that there's a ton of research that has looked at this for many, many years, that when we give surveys to people, they will answer the questions. If they agree to participate in the survey, right? Like if you call them at their house and they don't hang up on you, if they open the envelope that you send to their house and it's a mail-out questionnaire, and they actually don't throw it in the trash and they look at it and they start filling out the questions, they will answer the questions. The problem is that oftentimes people will answer questions when they really don't have any opinion at all, or they know nothing about whatever topic that you're interviewing them about. This happens more so in things like face-to-face interviews, where you're sitting with someone and you're interviewing them and writing down their answers or filling in the blanks, or in telephone interviews. But the point is that people will answer survey questions when they don't have an opinion, or they don't even know what you're particularly talking about, or they're not very informed on whatever issue you're asking them about. And when they do that, we call that a non-attitude. The issue is that as the interviewer, as the person who's conducting the survey, you don't know whether they've done that or not, right? Like if you ask them their opinion on abortion and they give you an opinion, you dutifully write it down on your form as the survey taker, right? And their answer looks exactly like someone else's answer who really does have an opinion on abortion. Does it make sense? And so when that goes into the data set, right, because when you're doing surveys, all you're really doing is collecting data, right? When that goes in the data set, the person with the non-attitude, their data looks exactly like the data of somebody with an attitude. And to be quite frank, researchers really don't have a lot of ways, really any good way, to distinguish those two answers from one another. So if I ask Dr. Brown Marsden her opinion on stem cell research, and she's never researched it and has no idea, but she gives me, you know, if it's, say you got like 5 response alternatives in your survey, and she gives me C, and then I ask Dr. Garrison the same question and he gives me C, but she's never researched it and knows no idea what stem cell research is, and he's a doctor of stem cell research, right? Like they're both, their opinions will look exactly the same in the data set, regardless of whether which one's uninformed or not. Does that make sense? And so researchers have to be able to figure out, well, how do we distinguish between those two answers? And there's not an easy, once it's in the data set, you can't distinguish from those types of answers. And so there's estimates that any survey data has at least some element of non-attitudes in it that the researcher can't control for. So why do people do that? Any guesses? So if you don't know the answer, if you're not informed about it, if you have no idea what they're asking you about, why would you still answer the question? And I brought coupons for people who answer questions for me. I have a free 32-ounce iced tea from Chicken Eat or a free chocolate chip cookie from Chicken Eat. And so if you answer questions, you'll get one of these. You can pick which one you want. But first you have to spray it down with COVID stuff so you don't get the COVID. We'll spray it, put it over, spray it. Hopefully it won't ruin it. All right? So why would somebody answer a question on a survey when they don't have any idea what it's talking about? Yes, ma'am.
They feel socially obligated to have an opinion on a next step.
Right. Very good. Would you like a tea or
I'll go for a tea.
a what?
A tea.
A tea. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. You raise your hand back there.
Yeah, I was gonna say, some surveys offer like gift cards or rewards when people respond to them.
Yes.
That prompts people to respond, and you know, they wish nothing about the topic.
That's true. Very good. Tea or cookie?
Neither.
Okay. Do you want to donate yours to somebody? That's not right. What's that? You raise your hand.
Yeah, they would rather not admit that they don't know something.
Yes. They don't want to appear stupid, right? Or uninformed. They don't want the researcher to think this person doesn't know anything about this particular issue. And so instead of saying, I don't know, or whatever, they just provide a response. Cookie or tea? Cookie? So yeah, so I'll give you an example from my own experience. When I was in college, I got a phone call, and this was back when we actually had real telephones in our rooms. I don't know if y'all even know what that is, but I had an actual real telephone, like one that you pick up and you hang up, and you know it has. Y'all know what I'm talking about? I'm not that old. And so I'm sitting in my dorm room, I get a phone call, I answer it, and there's a guy on the other end, and he's asking about a political race in the state of Texas for comptroller of public accounts. Now, how many of you know what a Texas comptroller of public account is? Neither did I. And so there was a race between a woman named Kay Bailey Hutchinson and a guy named, hold on. The whole point of the story is this guy's name.
Senate?
Huh?
Was they running for Senate or control?
No, they were running for comptroller of public accounts, but this was like in '97. So it was, no, I'm sorry, it was Carol Keaton Rylander, not Kay Bailey Hudson. It was Carol Keaton Rylander and a guy named Paul Hobby, Hobby. And so they said, hey, are you familiar with the race between Carol Keaton Rylander and Paul Hobby? And I was like, sure. No, I didn't. But when the guy said Paul Hobby, I thought he said Paul Harvey. And Paul Harvey is, for my generation and my parents' generation, a very famous radio personality guy. When I was young and I'd ride in my grandpa's pickup truck to the farm, Paul Harvey was always on the radio. And so when he said Paul Harvey, I was like, oh yeah, I know Paul Harvey. That guy's awesome. I used to grow up and listen to him on the radio. It's great. And so then they proceeded to ask me all these questions about this race for Texas Comptroller of Public Accounts. And the whole time I thought they were asking me about Paul Harvey, the radio guy. And so there were all these questions like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate Paul Hobby's, trustworthiness? 10, freaking 10, woo! And what about Carol Keaton Rylander? I don't know, 5. Because I didn't know anything about her, so I just gave her all 5s. And I gave Paul Hobby 10s on everything. And then they said, well, thank you, Mr. Duff, for participating in our survey, and I hung up. And I was like, I participated. And then later I found out that I was thinking about the completely wrong person and messed up, my entries in their data set were all wrong with non-attitudes and things like that, right? Because I participated thinking, well, this is my public duty. I should participate in the survey. I had no idea what they were interviewing me about. So that happens actually quite a bit. Maybe not to the extent that people misunderstanding a name or whatever, but people participate in surveys all the time when they don't actually have an opinion or attitude on that particular issue. And so, like I said, the problem is that people answer the questions even if they're uninformed or whatever, and the interviewer duly records the responses, puts it in the data set, and it looks exactly like data from people that are informed. So how do we try to solve this? How do we get around these non-attitudes? Well, the simplest way is to make respondent feel it's socially acceptable to say they don't know or are unfamiliar with the topic. Now, in a face-to-face interview, you can do that by just talking to them. Say, it's okay, it's fine if you don't understand or whatever. And like mail out or written questionnaires, you can use things like screening or filtering questions. Dr. Garrison has these slides, and so I'm not going to wait for you guys to write them down. So I'm going to try to get through this. All right. So you can employ things like these that say, do you have an opinion on this or not? Or have you thought much about this issue? So doing that, you can weed out some of the respondents who would give non-attitude responses by giving them an option that they think is acceptable, right? Something. Now that still doesn't get rid of everybody, right? There's still people that are going to say, that are still going to give an answer, even if they don't, even if you provide these types of options for them, they're still going to give an answer. But you can still weed out some people by providing those types of things in your survey. So a few rules of thumb. The problem of non-attitudes doesn't come with a simple solution. You just got to be like, if you're going to create a survey yourself for your project, right? You just got to be sensitive to the fact that there are issues with non-attitudes. You want to provide people with options that at least hopefully let them think that it's okay to say, I don't know, or I haven't thought much about this particular issue, right? So they don't feel pressured to give an answer. And then we're going to talk more about things like question wording and stuff too, where, as you design a survey yourself, you can think about, how you can word your questions, even things like the order of your questions and stuff like that, so that you're not putting unintended bias into your survey as you develop it and put it together. I will say this. we're going to talk about a number of issues with surveys, and surveys are, in a lot of ways, not perfect at all. I mean, the more you study surveys as a data collection tool, the more you find that they are riddled with issues that the researcher has to think about, has to take into account when they're putting together their surveys. And there's a number of things that no matter how much work and research you read and everything else, you still can't control for, like non-attitudes, right? Surveys are, it's like 100 years ago, my municipal government class, we've been talking about this, but the development and history of cities. Well, in the late 19th century, early 20th century, you know, the best mode of transportation, right? The best way to get from point A to point B was a horse, right? And at that point, that was like the tip top of technological innovation in moving from what, I don't know what the science is. Transportation. See, I remember phones, but not words like transportation. Like that was the tip top of scientific development of transportation, a horse and buggy, right? And one of the problems that posed to municipalities was that all the roads were covered in horse crap. And so sanitation was a big issue. But now, right, we've got cars that can drive themselves. And that is sort of the peak of the technological advancements in transportation. 100 years from now, you know, we may have something else, right? But right now, the best option we have from getting to point A to point B that's efficient and effective and sort of solves as many problems as we have, right, are automobiles, right? Back then it was the horse and buggy. Same thing with surveys. Surveys aren't perfect, but right now, the best way to gauge people's attitudes and beliefs about things are to ask them and then record them in a document, right? And we've got all sorts of ways that we can try to control for a lot of these problems and things like that. But they're still not perfect. But right now, they're sort of the top in technological advancement in measuring people's attitudes, right? I mean, maybe one day we'll be able to stick a probe in your brain and actually read your thoughts and know exactly what you're thinking. But for now, surveys are the best tool, right, that we have. And so I'm going to talk about a number of the issues that you need to think about in developing a survey and administering it and things like that. But just know it's not perfect. But for now, it's the best tool that we have to measure attitudes and beliefs that people have about lots of different things. All right? Fair enough? Okay. So this is a quote from one of the textbooks I use in my public opinion class. It's a book by Herbert Asher called Polling in the Public, and it goes through a lot of different things about the issues with surveys and whatnot. But he says, of all the pitfalls associated with public opinion polling, question wording is probably the one that's most familiar to everybody, right? Familiar to consumers of public opinion research. The use of a loaded word or an inflammatory phrase can affect the pattern of responses to a survey question. You may have seen examples of this. You may have, you know, talked about it. Like, I mean, we even see this in, you know, even after like a political debate, and they ask questions of the candidates. People complain about, well, that was a loaded question or whatever. But we see this in surveys, especially in push polls or those pseudo polls that I was talking about. The fundraising polls, they use a lot of you know, inflammatory language and stuff like that to try to influence the way that people answer the questions. But that stuff is pretty straightforward. I mean, it's really noticeable if you're looking for it when you get one of those surveys in the mail or something, right? But even when researchers try to control for that kind of stuff, they often still run into issues of question wording in their surveys. Sometimes it's as simple as like using the word welfare versus using the word aid to the needy. And I'll talk some more about that in a little bit, but we find differences in how people answer questions just based on small wording changes like that. And often they're not intentional, they're not meant to try to mislead people, but they end up still having an impact on the way people answer questions in surveys. So like I said, if an advocacy group wants to, put out a survey that shows that, the issues and things that they're concerned about are the most important, then they may do something like commission a poll that has a list of different problems in the world and then ask people, if these are the most important problems to them. So like, this might be an example. This is actually a question that we see. The question itself is one we see a lot in surveys. A survey might ask, which of the following do you consider to be the most important problem facing the United States today? That's a very common question we see in lots of different surveys. And then they'll give you a list of problems, like immigration reform, gender reveal parties. We've learned recently that those cause massive forest fires in California. And so those apparently are a big, huge problem that we want to stay away from. In fact, I would advocate that we just do away with gender reveal parties altogether. If anybody wants to get on that bandwagon with me, just let me know. We'll form an interest group, like a 501c or whatever. And we'll start making a political action committee, put that together, maybe run a candidate in the next presidential election. So if anybody's interested in being a candidate, let me know. And
What about you?
no, I want to be the campaign manager.
If you guys don't know, Dr. Duff is on the Borough City Council.
Yeah, so I was elected as a public official, and now I no longer want to be one. In fact, my term was supposed to end in May, but because of the COVID, we postponed the election until November 3rd, and to coincide with all the other elections. And so I had to stay on an extra several months, but my last official meeting is this month's meeting. And then our November meeting, I will show up and they will thank me for my service, and I will leave and never have to do that miserable job again. I also have a very long-term feud with squirrels. I'll be happy to discuss that with you after class as to not waste a lot of time, but just know that squirrels are the devil. And Dr. Garrison, this is probably one of the big issues he deals with in town, is not enough good barbecue places in Wichita Falls. So if you were to look at that and be serious about it, right, you'd say that immigration reform, right, is probably more important than those other things. Maybe not as important as gender reveal parties, but overall, I think most people would say immigration reform is probably the most important. So like an interest group that's focusing on immigration issues would put a survey out like that and with that question, and then they come out and they say, look, 90% of the public thinks that immigration reform is the most important issue facing the country today. Please send us money, right? But if they don't publish the question and they don't give people a look at, exactly how they came to that data, then you wouldn't be able to tell if that was legitimate or not, right? And so actually one of the things that sort of survey watchdogs insist upon is that even in legitimate public opinion surveys, that organizations publish the question wording and the response options that they give people so that you can look and see, was this a legitimate question that didn't have any sort of built-in bias? So that's an example of an organization that would do that on purpose, right? But often researchers aren't trying to do these things on purpose. I know that I've put together surveys myself from my own research. In fact, I've had research published based on surveys that I've written myself, and with the help of other political scientists and even an economist at one point. And we administered the first round of our survey, and we got all the data back and collected it and went through it and everything else, and realized that a couple of our questions were absolute crap. And we had to go back and rewrite the questions and make adjustments. And we ended up administering that survey 5 or 6 different times until we got it to a point where we felt like it was not influenced by some of these things that I'm going to talk about. And that's where our students when I was at Michigan State, that's where the students became our guinea pigs, where we would administer it in our classes repeatedly, different classes over a course of several semesters to try to get our survey down to where we thought it was good enough. And then we were able to get it into a larger survey that was administered in the state of Michigan residents, and that's where we got our final data set that we were able to get in our paper that was published. But it took a while. And we weren't trying to do any of this on purpose, right? We were trying to make real legitimate questions. So even highly reputable polling organizations can sometimes have questions in them that have unintentional bias that they never they never even anticipated would happen. So we even see this in straightforward factual questions. I mean, simple things just about like a number of children in the family, or age, or income, or the race of the individual. I mean, you can imagine a situation where you ask somebody about the number of children in their family, and they're trying to think, okay, well, I've got 2 at home, but I've got 1 in college, and I've got, 1 that's, married and moved away. Are they asking about the 2 at the home? Are they asking about all 4 of them? Are they asking about the 2 that still are dependent upon me? Or, and then there's 1 that's married and not dependent upon me anymore. But if you just say 3, right, then it's, depending on what the researcher was actually looking for with the question, it may influence the data one way or the other. Sometimes income's a really good one. Income's one that, are you asking about things like the individual's own specific income? Like if you came to my house and asked me about, and we're doing the face-to-face, door-to-door interview, right? You ask me about my income, I'm going to think, okay, are you asking me about my own income? Are you asking about the combined income with me and my wife? Are you asking me about the $1,000 I won off a scratch off last year? Let's include all that. You're talking about gross income? Are you talking about net income? Are you talking about, whatever, right? And so there's confusion just asking what's your income. And so that can be a problem as well. Race and ethnicity is another one. Sometimes it's fairly straightforward, like I'm white, Caucasian, right? But if you think about things like Hispanic or Latinos, there's lots of different groups in that category, right? I mean, a Cuban American in many ways is different than, say, a Mexican American or something like that. And so a lot of surveys now incorporate a lot more different racial and ethnic groups into their questions instead of just saying they're Hispanic or Latino. Does that make sense? Okay. So at any rate, those types of things can trip up surveyors if they're not careful about them. Let's see. So you can imagine then if question wording can affect really objective things like just income, age, and stuff like that, then imagine what kind of effect it will have on more subjective questions about your attitudes on things like the death penalty or abortion or war or whatever, right? So for example, this is one that's straight out of actual surveys that were conducted. Suppose the budgets of your state and local governments have to be curtailed. Which of these parts would you limit most severely? Highways, parks and recreation, aid to the needy, and education. This question was asked on a nationwide survey, and 8% who answered the question chose aid to the needy. So going back again, the question is about which one should be cut, right? So which program should be cut? So 8% said aid to the needy. But another question asked it the same way, except they substituted public welfare programs instead of aid to the needy, and almost 40% said they would cut public welfare programs. For a chicken eat coupon, why do you think that is? Why the big change? Why did it increase by like 30-something%?
Social Security and public welfare, like they tend to be politicized for a bit in America, at least. So that's why people probably they align with the political stance on it.
Very good. Would you like a tea or cookie? Exactly. Public welfare, the word welfare is a loaded word, whether you intentionally mean it or not. When people hear when a lot of people hear, especially conservatives, when they hear the word welfare, they think of people that aren't working and getting government money, right? But when you say aid to the needy, it sounds like needy, they need it, right? It's more, it appeals to the sensitivity more than the term welfare, right? There's a ton of research on the word welfare. It's just like, for a lot of people, that's just a bad word, a political bad word, that when you put it in surveys and things like that, it can influence the way people answer questions. It doesn't, when you look at those two questions, it doesn't seem like something that would really make a difference, but it clearly does. Sometimes it's not the actual wording necessarily, it's the number of response alternatives that you give or the kinds of response alternatives you give. So this is one that was in a survey when Bill Clinton was president. Y'all know Bill Clinton, right? Yeah, know Bill Clinton. Can't see my Bill. I did not have sexual relations with that woman. That's my Bill Clinton impression. I don't have a Trump yet. All right, so what is your opinion of Bill Clinton as a candidate for president? Favorable, unfavorable, do not know enough to offer an opinion. This one adds in favorable, not favorable, undecided, and I haven't heard enough about the candidate to have an opinion. So based upon two surveys, this question found fewer Americans offering an opinion because it provided two opportunities for them to sort of bail on the question, right? The first one had this, this, and this. This one has this one too, and so people, there was another option for them to choose, and so less people picked one of these. Another example. As you may know, the federal budget is currently enjoying a surplus of funds. That actually happened at one point. I know that's really surprising if you follow the federal budget, but at one point when I was alive, the federal budget actually had a surplus. Leaders in Washington are debating on how to most effectively use this surplus. In your opinion, should the money be used for a tax cut or should it be used to fund new government programs? So when they asked that, 60% of Americans favored a tax cut compared to 25% who favored funding for new government programs. Now, another time they ask it a different way, you can see in this one, they actually list some of the suggested programs that it would fund. So should the money be used for a tax cut or should it be spent on programs for education, the environment, healthcare, crime fighting, military defense? And that one, only 22% favored a tax cut, while 69% supported funding listed programs. Why do you think there's a change there? Yes, ma'am.
So you know or feel like you know what your money is going for.
Exactly. It's not just ambiguous government spending, essentially, right? Here, you're targeting specific programs, and they're programs that different groups can, like, appeal to different groups, right? Like, liberals would see this and go, environment, healthcare, that's great. Conservatives would look at crime fighting, military spending, that's great too. We should spend on all of those things, right? And so that influenced how they answered. You want another one?
Sure, thank you.
Cookie, you want another tea?
I think I want
Huh?
tea. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah. I'm going to skip ahead real quick because I've got 8 minutes. Another thing to consider is that question order can affect the way that people answer questions too. This is one of the more classic examples. I'll run through this real quick. So there was a survey that asked people this question in this order. Do you think the U.S. should let communist newspaper reporters from other countries come in here and send back to their papers the news as they see it? This was during the Cold War when people were very scared of that type of thing. And then the second question was, do you think a communist country like Russia should let American newspaper reporters come in and send back to America the news as they see it? So essentially, should they be able to come over here and report back, and should we be able to go there and report back, right? So when those two questions were asked in that order, support for letting communist reporters in the US was much lower than when the questions were asked in reverse order. Why would that be the case?
In America, there's a huge stigma against communism because they're big fans of democracy. So they're against communism. So they don't want to let like the communist poison come into America.
Right. But why would the answers change when the questions were reversed?
Because they see their own democracy as a good thing. So by going over there, oh yeah, we're spreading democracy, we're doing something good.
Okay. So when the person saw the question first, should you let communists come over here? Communism is bad. No, they should not be able to come over here. And then do you think we should be able to go over there? Yeah, sure, because we're the good people, right? But when they see the other question first, do you think communist country like Russia should let American newspaper reporters come in and send back to American news they see it? They're like, well, yeah, absolutely. We're the good guys. America should be able to do that. And then they read the next question. Do you think they should be able to come over here? And now they're like, no, I don't like communists. But if I say that they shouldn't, then I'm kind of hypocritical, right? Like I'm saying we should be able to, but then not them. That's not really fair. And so at the end, we see that when the questions were reversed, more people gave support for letting them come over here than when it was in this particular way. Does that make sense? You want tea or cookie? Okay. Really what happens with question order is often just an effect we call priming, where people are primed to think about one thing and then it influences how they answer the following questions. I'm going to run through these. I don't get a second day. Huh? Yeah. Well, I get an hour and 20 minutes in that class. All right. So types of surveys. So if you're thinking about the types of surveys that you want to do for your research project, there's a number of different ones. Self-administered questionnaires are like mail-in surveys, or when you just hand somebody a survey like in class and say, can you fill this out? You gotta make sure the directions are clear and things like that. But there's some benefits to those and drawbacks as well. When you get the slides, you should be able to see the benefits and drawbacks. Most of the students in my classes that have done surveys for a research project or something in class, they've used the self-administered questionnaire where they type it up, they print it off, and they hand it out to her. Hey, can you fill this out real quick and give it back to me at the end of class? Other times they've done web surveys, and I'll talk about those in a minute. But these are just the written ones. A lot of companies use these through the mail, but you can do them just handing them out in class or something like that. And there's benefits and drawbacks to those kinds that are here on the slides that you can look at. Telephone interviews. That's the way that most of the big survey companies still do surveys, is through calling people. When I was growing up, it was really the main way. In fact, for a lot of the major survey organizations like Gallup or Zogby or Rasmussen, that was the way that they did surveys. Now they're doing a combination of telephone and online and things like that. You can obviously imagine some of the problems with telephone surveys now, where people don't actually have telephones in their home. They have cell phones. They've blocked, spam numbers and things like that. They don't answer the cell phone when they don't recognize the number, all that kind of stuff. And that's one thing that's led to a huge increase in what we call, a huge decrease in what we call response rates. And that a response rate is the percentage of people that you've called who actually participate and finish the survey. So right now, there's a study that came out about 2 years ago that said that in order to get one person to, the response rates were like less than 10%. So basically they had to interview, what does that mean? What's the math there? They had to call 100 people to get 10 people to answer the survey. Is that right? And so that's about where these telephone surveys are now, right? And that's not really good. That means you've got 90 people out of 100 who answer the phone or don't answer the phone or hang up or whatever, who aren't supplying their opinions and stuff, right? But that's still predominantly the way that they do it because of some of these benefits, right? Like if you actually get them to answer the phone, you can usually get them to answer the survey. Personal interviews, face-to-face, that might be something. I've had students do that method in some of my classes when they've written papers based on their own surveys or whatever. Today and during COVID, I don't know if I would advise you doing face-to-face personal interviews, but that's entirely up to you. If you sit 10 feet apart and wear a mask or whatever, it's probably fine. For a big nationwide survey organization, those are very expensive to try to do. You have to train people to interview people face-to-face and stuff like that. And so it's not very cost effective. And so that's why most organizations use telephone or the web. My clock says 10:50. That one says 10:45. I assume we're going by my phone.
10:49.
10:49. All right. The last thing I'll mention is interviewer effects. Just real quick. When you're doing face-to-face interviews or even over the phone, sometimes people will try to guess who you are. They will also, especially when you're face-to-face, they don't even have to guess. They can just see you. There's a ton of research on like gender of interviewer effects. For example, men lie about how much money they make to female interviewers. Surprise. But there's also some really good research on race of interviewer effects. And it actually affects not only white people who are being interviewed, but also black people who are being interviewed, depending on the race of the interviewer. White people will give much more they'll be more, what's the word I'm looking for? Racial friendly, maybe, if they're being interviewed by an African American as opposed to a white person. The opposite goes, it also works similar for blacks who are being interviewed by a white person. And there's actually some really good research on, I don't have time to go into it really, but by Darren Davis called Donning the Black Mask, and it looks at African American interviewers being interviewed by whites or blacks and the effects that has on the way that they answer interview questions. He was one of my professors at MSU at Michigan State. It's a good article, like the American Journal of Political Science or something. The short answer is that just the person doing the interview can influence how the questions are answered. So you have to be careful about those things. Last question, any guesses as to what type of person, like demographically and so on, that survey companies like to use the most as a face-to-face interviewer? It's a good guess. Middle-aged white women. They're seen as like the least threat, I don't know, motherly, I don't know what it is, but they sort of pose statistically, they have the least amount of interviewer effects. There was a study on that.
What is there with accents and not, don't they look for Midwestern?
Yeah.
The accents are
Yeah. Yeah, the friendly, accent, stuff like that. Yeah. All right, well, thank you. Sorry I had to rush to the end of it. These 50-minute classes can be rough. And if anybody wants a coupon, that completely defeats the purpose of giving it to you to answer the question.
We did that after the.
Yeah.
Connor, we shot the on the team.
You're good.
Thanks again.
I'm good.
All right.
Thank you.